morning. How's everybody today? Today, I just want to say I'm so grateful for 22 degrees. After that cold snap, 22 degrees is wonderful. Hey, let's talk about some advice. The best advice that I've ever got as a dairy farmer. One of the best pieces of advice I got as a dairy farmer when I first started was go find somebody that has done this for 30 years and is successful. So in the Ozarks, it is not like anywhere else. We have rocks, we have fescue, we have minimal, unless you have bottom ground, you're not going to be doing any tilling or planting corn or any of that kind of thing. So that was Charlie, one of my old neighbors, who gave me that advice. Said go find somebody that's successful here in the Ozarks and do what they do. If they milk Holsteins, you milk Holstein. And that has been great advice, not to reinvent or try to make something that works somewhere else work here. And that leads me to another piece of advice. Every farm is different, and you need to figure out what works for your farm, which sounds contradictory to what I just said, but every farm is different, and what works down the road may not work here. And for us, that means rotational grazing is yes, but intensive rotational grazing is a no. We just have too rough of country to run a hot wire up and down and across rocks and creeks, and so we do to do the rotational grazing, but we don't do intensive rotational grazing. And so that was another great piece of advice I got from a neighbor, was find out what works for your farm. I got this from a guy named Tate. He said, you got to look out for yourself because nobody else will. And as a Christian, I had a hard time figuring out how to apply that. But the truth of it is I have a family and myself to care for. And when I'm making business dealings, when I'm thinking about buying something, when I'm thinking about selling something, or whatever it is that we're dealing with, if I don't look out for myself, nobody else will. So it turned out to be really good advice if it's applied in the right way. Another great piece of advice I got: put as much spring as you possibly can in the barn. When the cows are milking good, when the spring flush is on, it's time to cut hay and put that away, so that in the winter you can continue your spring flush. And that's how we try to operate here, is put as much spring as we possibly can up. And so far it's worked out pretty good for us. Another great piece of advice I got was from my dad years ago. He said, in business, just take the cream. Let somebody else worry about the milk. I kind of wished I would have taken that some days in the milk business, but what he meant was there are things that aren't worth the hassle of trying to make it an extra buck at, and there are things that will really return. He played that out in his business as a restaurant owner, and not opening on days that were typically slow, not opening hours that were typically slow. Yes, he could have made a few more dollars if he would have stayed open and slugged it out, but to him, it was worth it to have a little rest. If you can think of a good way to apply that to the dairy business, let me know in the comments. I had a lady named Lisa tell me, if you're going to dairy farm, you better learn how to pray. And we did some of that with this girl here a couple of nights ago, about 3 o'clock in the morning, when we were trying to pull a set of twins. I had one leg of one twin, one leg of another, not knowing that there was 2 calves in there, and we had a little bit of a struggle for a while until I figured out what was going on. We did lose both the calves, and there was some praying. And lastly today, one of the pieces of advice that comes to mind is advice I got when I was 18 years old and broke my ankle. And my dad said sometimes that God puts us on our back so that we can look up. I hated that at the time because I felt like he was saying that I needed a smackdown, But truly, I found out over time that God does speak to us through our trials, and that a lot of times we need to learn patience, or we need to learn endurance, or we need to learn self-control. All these things that are fruits of the Spirit come to us sometimes through trials. So I think that turned out to be great advice. So after a few years of farming on my own, I got a few experiences under my belt. What kind of advice would I have to offer? One, do as much as you can on your own with your own money. Try not to borrow anything, especially for things like feed and bills, stuff that you have nothing to show for after it's gone. I would say that there are too many good cows out there to own a bad one. So if you've got a problem cow, it's just a drain on your mental estate and financially a lot of times to keep them. So thankfully, as a dairy farmer, one of the best things about my co-workers is if they give me problems, I can just sell them. Yeah, I'll see you at Mickey D's.